So we'll get going because I know we've got a lot to get into today. So thank you all for dialing in. Everyone, it's Friday, the chat's going off, which is brilliant. So I think that's a sign we're going to have a good session and everyone's already engaged, which is lovely to see. We've got a session by Gary this morning, all on EV and risk, and we've called it Charging Ahead, which I will not take credit for the pun, but I think that's probably one of the best names for a webinar that we've had. I've got the very easy job out of the two of us this morning because I've got the honour of introducing Gary. My name's Jen Corley, so I work within Zurich Municipal. My background is in strategic risk and business resilience, hence why I'm opening the session. And I was on a very cold dog walk this morning, thinking about how do I do this session justice? How do I think about the best way to open this session? And I thought, I know what, I'll count how many EV cars I see on my dog walk on the way to the muddy field. And it was about 1 in 5, which when we talk about risk, especially strategic risk, it's odd because we're always thinking about far in the future, what's the next risk coming along? But EV is here and now. And if you're in an organisation that isn't thinking about EV, it's definitely a case of if rather than when. So over the past 5 years, we've seen risks connected to technology, to data, to AI rapidly accelerate up the emerging risk list far quicker than what we've ever seen before. And because of that, we're seeing things like policy, frameworks, processes are still very much lagging behind, which is really why it's so important to think about risk management and building really robust risk management processes into your organisation. And as Gary will come on to this, our message today is very much about ensuring that you've got those joined up, robust risk management processes in place, not only to necessarily mitigate those risks, but actually to harness the huge opportunity that technology risks like EV could bring your organisation. So this is very much about a really holistic process, keeping the conversation joined up and going all the way through from your boards and committees who might be talking about risk appetite, all the way through to connecting health and safety, asset management, even to those people who might be driving around in EV cars or may have been patting me on my dog walk this morning. And it was 1 in 5 that I saw. I did only see 5 cars and one of them was an EV car, which was very helpful. So I will hand over to someone who's done a far more technical assessment and can give you a far more technical review of EV. And just before I hand over to Gary, a reminder that we are recording today's session and we'll be sending the link out to people afterwards if you want to rewatch. We won't be sending the slides, but the recording will be there for you. And if you've got any questions throughout today's session, please pop them in the Q&A function in the chat, which you are already all using. So I will hand over to Gary.
Thank you, Jen. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the EV session today. I'm really pleased to be able to deliver this session. And as always, before I start, I think I just wanted to give a shout out to Sarah Sykes and yourself, Jen, for organising this. There's a lot of hard work goes on behind the scenes to bring a session like this together. So thank you both for all your efforts in putting this together, and thank you for the invite. And I think what my main aim for this session really is just to give you some really practical tips, ideas and hints and good practice measures from a risk engineer's point of view. Really, I've been a risk engineer for Zurich Resilience Solutions now for 21 years, and it's a really interesting world we live in at the moment with emerging risks. So many of these emerging risks are here now, and EVs is just one of those. So, and it's a subject that I spend a lot of time on. So I wanted to really just kick off and start off really in a positive way and talk about how do I suggest we approach the challenge of EVs. And what I would say, there isn't really a silver bullet. There's no one simple answer to this, but the way I approach it is to think about it in layers of protection. And I think for me, it feels a really good, logical pragmatic way of approaching some of the challenges we see with EVs. And I've broken that down on this first slide to talk about really breaking it down into these multiple layers from prevention to structural resistance, but also underpinning it with thinking about the needs, the requirements of the fire and rescue service also. And I think hierarchically we look at first of all, what do I look at when I'm thinking about EVs? What are the prevention measures in place in terms of things like prevention measures start at the design stage, thinking about what are the inspection, test and maintenance regimes going on for EV cars and EV chargers. That's a really good starting point. Moving on to detection, and I'll explore all of these in a bit more detail. The detection layer is really getting us thinking about, do we need detection? What type of detection? The appropriateness of detection? Is it heat detection? Is it combustible gas detection? If we're talking about enclosed or open-sided car parks. Also considering the needs of those people using car parks in terms of their means of escape, their early warning, how are they going to get out of the car park? And then that moves us on to compartmentation. What is suitable? What is suitable and sufficient in terms of the compartmentation expectation in terms of a fire resistance? Is it 60 minutes, 120 minutes? For trying to contain the fire within a compartment. And then we can move on to thinking about the suppression layer and thinking about some of the car parks I see may have sprinklers, others may not. And it's about what type of sprinkler system do I need? What are the features of sprinklers? What are the benefits? But also we have to also think about the limitations of sprinklers when it comes to electric vehicles as well. And then we move on to the penultimate layer, the structural resistance layer, which gets us to think about structural resistance. If we think about a car park, will it withstand the effects of a fire? And interestingly, still today, the requirement within Approved Document B, which is the guidance that supports the building regulations, Approved Document B, fire safety. For open-sided car parks, the structural resistance is just 15 minutes. That's the minimum requirement under building regulations for a car park to withstand the effects of a fire. And that's really, that 15 minutes there is just to facilitate means of escape, to enable people to escape from the car park. So the missing link there when I look at new car park designs featuring EVs is to sort of challenge the design around, are we considering the resilience of the built environment? And we've had some high profile fires recently in car parks where the structure hasn't withstood the effects of fire and has been a total loss. But fortunately, and most importantly, everyone's escaped from that car park. But that structural resistance layer is really important because it gets us thinking beyond just life safety, gets us thinking about the resilience of the built environment. And finally, underpinning it is the fire and rescue service layer, where I would suggest that's a layer where you can start thinking about how are the fire and rescue service going to tackle EV fires? What sort of water requirements do they need? What sort of access requirements do they need? And what are they going to be their standard operating procedures for car park fires? So I think approaching this and the challenge of an emerging risk such as EV requires a layers of protection approach. I think this is a really good way of approaching the challenges as we have them now. And I'll explore each of those elements in a bit more detail. But before we move on to EVs themselves, I think it's important just to take a step back and think about modern vehicles, because it's a good lead in to electric vehicles, because modern vehicles have completely changed. You look at the picture of the Mini on the left from the 1980s compared to the Mini, excuse me, on the right, modern day Mini. It's completely changed. The picture on the right shows a vehicle that is wider, larger, longer, and it has a predominance of plastics. It has plastic fuel tanks, and you'll probably notice yourself if you're trying to park your car in a modern day car park now, how little space there is between you and the next car when you get out of the car. It can sometimes be a bit of a squeeze. And and cars have grown due to the predominance of plastics have grown down predominantly down to the requirements around safety requirements and the NCAP ratings for cars. But what that's done, that's brought that additional challenge of thinking about those additional fire challenges brought on by the predominance of plastics now in a modern day vehicle. And you compare that to the Mini on the left, where essentially it's a metal body with four rubber tires. So when we're thinking about cars, the design, the size of cars is an important lead into thinking about the challenges of EVs. And that's a question I want to really just pose to you, really, is do EVs pose a greater risk than internal combustion engines? I think we only have to see the social media brigade on LinkedIn and other forums where essentially I think bad news sells, and we see this focus on electric vehicle fires as being something that's happening all of the time, happening regularly, and it's often EVs are promoted in a negative light in terms of the sheer quantity of EV fires. But actually digging into the data, which that data is still very much in ongoing in development. We have to sort of take a step back and realise actually the threat of electric vehicles and the quantity of fires that actually happen in electric vehicles is far less than ICE internal combustion engine vehicles. So I think it's important to take a step back and just try and dig into the data a little bit and not be affected by some of the scare stories we see on the internet, because the statistics don't really align. And when you look at that graph there, I look at a lot of research regarding electric vehicle fires, and again, it's very much in development. There's a lot of research going on out there, and we have to critically analyze that research to understand what that data is saying. But in broad terms, what we know from electric vehicles is what we call the heat release rate, the peak energy release rate in watts, which is sort of the amount of energy that's being generated by an electric vehicle fire, is very similar actually to an internal combustion engine. The key difference being that the point at which it reaches peak heat release rate does start much earlier with electric vehicles, but essentially the same peak heat release rate are very, very similar for both ICE and electric vehicles. So I think, yeah, it's some of those misconceptions around electric vehicle fires do need challenging, and that's something that I'm keen to promote, that we take a step back and look at the data objectively. And it's not to say that we don't have fires in car parks. We do. This slide demonstrates that we do have fires in car parks, and sometimes there's a large number of car fires involved. But I think, again, building on my previous point, it's actually looking at the evidence, looking at the data, and just saying, it's easy to blame an EV car for as being the origin of the fire, being the seat of the fire, and that is not always the case. And so yes, we're exposed to large car fires in car parks, but just I guess my plea is just to try and be objective in terms of understanding that there's many more internal combustion engine fires vehicles than there are EV fires. And as I was preparing for this presentation, it was really interesting to look on the BBC website and just pick up some recent events. And what I found interesting was the photograph on the left that says fire from electric car spreads through house. And I looked at that and thought about that photograph. And when you look closely at the construction of the dwelling in that house there, you can see there is quite a large element of combustible construction. And yes, the electric car was parked outside the front of the house. I guess my challenge to that photograph is, would we still have the same result as we would for an ICE car? And possibly we would, because we're still getting the same amount of energy, the same amount of heat release rate as we would from an ICE car, and the result may well be the same. So it's maybe potentially misleading around the headlines for that. And looking at the photograph on the right from the dealership blaze as well, we can see here the BBC have stated possibly caused. I know in fire investigation it's always quite difficult, it's quite challenging to understand causation. But again, that headline is that immediate grabber, isn't it, of saying, well, electric vehicles in the headlines, but then it says possibly caused. So I think for us within Zurich, what we're doing here is trying to take a step back from these headlines and understand the causation, look at the data, and try and be objective to where these fires are coming from. And it's not to say, as we move to a electric vehicle world, that there aren't challenges. And the fire and rescue service are certainly spending a lot of money investing in training to deal with electric vehicles in terms of equipment, training firefighters. And yeah, they are bracing themselves for a rise, but more importantly, they're bracing themselves for a change in approach as well in terms of dealing with electric vehicle fires. And yeah, absolutely, they are more challenging than they are for an internal combustion engine fire. You've got within an electric vehicle fire, you have essentially a thermal runaway event, a self-sustaining fire, and fire and rescue services have to adopt to this new method of firefighting, that the same methods that apply to internal combustion engine vehicles do not apply to electric vehicles. And if you look at an internal combustion engine vehicle, diesel, petrol, you can find that you know when the crews, firefighters attend site, once they've got water for the hose reels, 230 litres of water a minute through a 22 mil hose reel, you can knock that fire down in a few minutes. For a petrol diesel car, maybe total time with damping down 20 minutes. But that's quite it's very different for an electric vehicle fire, much more difficult to extinguish, because you simply can't put water on the battery. You can't get water onto the battery, and that leads to the really nicely segues to, well, actually, do we want water on the battery? Because one of the big challenges with electric vehicles is, well, there's two major challenges, one to firefighters and the other to the environment. Firefighters are exposed to highly toxic clouds containing hydrogen and many other toxic gas species. And so their approach using breathing apparatus and being mindful of their own health and safety. There's been a number of incidents recently where firefighters have approached electric vehicles without breathing apparatus and have resulted in a serious illness from ingestion of heavy metals and the toxic cloud gases. So it does require a different approach. It requires a very much a tailored EV approach. And if you look at the picture on the right, I wanted to share with you where this is in a recent fire in the US, where the fire and rescue service were alerted to a fire. for an electric vehicle. And what they did was they towed the vehicle away from the charging station, left it in the middle of the car park, created an exclusion zone, and essentially let it burn. So the philosophy of many fire and rescue services, if they can, is to let the vehicle burn and essentially a fuel controlled fire, and that brings with it some advantages insofar as what you're not doing is you're not then generating other toxic gases such as hydrogen fluoride. Application of water will then mean that contaminated water could go into drains, into rivers, into drinking water, and that's very much needs to be avoided at all costs. So letting it burn is the least worst option here, and this is what they were doing in this case. And yes, the fire brigade still need water, but they need it for boundary cooling, so they would look to provide cooling excuse me, to other parts of the car park. So that excuse me. Sorry about that. So that's just to really give you a flavour really of the kind of new challenges and the way the fire and rescue services are approaching that, and for us within Zurich is understanding the challenges that fire event brings to the environment. I also just wanted to now just really share some of the sort of top sort of areas we look at really in terms of our site assessments and and just to provide some additional guidance there. So one of the things we look at really and is to understand, do you have rapid charging units on your premises, because that brings that additional risk of a direct current, which needs to be understood, and because it's extremely dangerous to have that level of voltage. You want to really understand whether your charging units, your charging areas are going to be subject to impact or malicious damage. We would look at that and look at what control measures you may have in place. Really important, and I'll cover this in a bit more depth, is are the chargers placed close to combustible construction? This is one area where we find really common that there's a disconnect between what the building structure is constructed of and where the chargers are located. And ITM stands for inspection, test and maintenance. We want to dig deep and understand just what level of inspection, test and maintenance, really gain that confidence that you have a suitable regime in place. Isolation refers to electrical isolation. Have you got a means for your car park, for the fire and rescue service, to electrically isolate your chargers? That's a really important point and something we ask for and look for. And again, we want staff training, that goes without saying, in terms of the use and operation and maintenance of the chargers, but also signage to let people know that there are EV chargers on site. Housekeeping is really important. Sometimes on our surveys, we'll come across accumulation of leaves and rubbish and combustible materials in and around charging units. And finally, where are they positioned? Are they that position in subject to water ingress, or close to buildings, or close to a propane fuel tank, for example? So these are the kind of simple, quick things that we check on site just to get an overall feel and flavour of the adequacy of the charging units. And then just moving on to car parks, if you're in charge of, or if you have an enclosed or open-sided car park, one of the key aspects to consider is how the fire and rescue service going to access the electric vehicles. We would normally advise, for those EVs to be located on the ground floor of a car park, if possible, and considering your the needs of the fire and rescue service in terms of accessing the area within an emergency plan. So your emergency plan and your fire risk assessment should be considering how you deal with an EV fire. And again, that's something I would often dig into on site. And then staying within the car park itself, do you have automatic detection? Is it the right type of detection? Is it just standard heat detection? Or do you need to consider moving to combustible gas detection? As I mentioned with the photographs of the electric vehicle fires, there's a wide variety of combustible gases that will be emitted during an EV fire: hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen, carbon monoxide, acetylene, methane, to name just a few. And so do you need to consider in terms of combustible gas detection? Because when the battery goes into thermal runaway, that's the point where those combustible gas species start to be emitted. And then finally, is considering the need for the extraction of those combustible gases. So once that combustible gas detector operates, you normally link the operation of that to your extraction of those combustible and toxic gases. So it's thinking about that fire event and then thinking about how do I then extract these toxic gases. And then just staying with the fire and rescue service, again, thinking about their needs, their requirements in an emergency situation. I restate that need to consider the electrical firefighters isolation switch. We've got a number of sites now which are considering that, so the fire and rescue service can easily, quickly have a conspicuous signage and location where they can easily turn off the power to the chargers before commencing firefighting operations. And I would say that also needs to be linked into your wider fire risk assessment emergency plan. So generally, fire risk assessments for life safety consider the building itself only and the people within it. But I would argue that scope needs to be extended to include also your car parking areas as well, and the fire safety challenges associated with car parking and assessment of those risks. And within that emergency plan and that fire risk assessment, which are linked together, think about having a premises information box for the fire and rescue service on site. Think about having also access to water supplies. The fire and rescue service may need to undertake boundary cooling. They may need to cool areas of the structure or other vehicles to stop that fire spreading away from the EV. They're not dealing with the EV itself if it's a let it burn, but it's important they're able to cool the surrounding areas. So, typically we would look for fire hydrants within 90 meters of the premises. And as I stated earlier, one of the really big challenges we see around car parks and charging especially is the location of the charger itself. I would say one of the big challenges is the reliance on a contractor to supply. You sign a contract for EV chargers, they get on and do the job, but actually there's a period where before that work starts is to think about what is the structure and what's it made of, what are the construction materials, where that charger is going to be. And we commonly see within Zurich, there's a list there of 5 combustible products on buildings that we commonly see where chargers are placed close to. So the implication or potential there is if we have a fire in a charger or electric vehicle, can that spread then to highly combustible construction? And that really needs some careful thought and thinking about where your chargers and where your electric vehicles are positioned in relation to combustible construction. So it requires a competent person to really join the dots and think about not just install chargers because that's the right thing to do, which it is, but actually just taking a step back and thinking about, actually, I need to do a proper plan review process here, understand what the risks are, what are my control measures, and where should they be correctly placed. And just moving on, or staying with electric vehicle chargers themselves, if you look at the picture on the left with the workers in the high vis equipment, this is a site I went to only just recently, and it's a brand new build, a big logistics warehouse for a very high value critical spares for a major project. And and this is a really good example of perhaps a little bit of lack of joined up thinking, because they've got a huge car park, huge amounts of space, but it was decided to put the electric vehicles and the charging units right next to the logistics warehouse. So this is an area where we sit down with our clients and other customers, and we get involved at plan review stage. We can, by design, think about some of the challenges associated with charging, and think, are those chargers best positioned in that location? And the picture on the right again shows an example. This is not a site I personally visited, but again, you can see the position of the chargers close to the curtain glazed windows of that, again, large office warehouse building. So again, I think there's an opportunity there to think about this much more deeply at design stage, working much closer with the contractor and thinking sort of ahead, and thinking about what's the right thing to do, and employing competent people to not just think about the chargers themselves, but actually how does it impact the wider built environment. And the other important aspect of that picture, both those pictures, is considering potential impact damage as well. You know, do I need to consider additional control measures in order to reduce the impact damage? And then before the installation, just some tips and hints really. There is one of the documents we advise our clients to look at is the IET Code of Practice. That's a really good, it's a robust guidance document that the people you're employing to install your charging units, they should be cognizant of that. You know, they should be competent to understand what are the requirements within that code of practice. Are they meeting that code of practice, and are there any gaps? And that's what you want to understand. Can they meet that particular code of practice? And again, we should be considering the location of the charging units at that design stage before installation. We should be considering, do we need electrical isolation for the fire and rescue service? Again, no apologies, but we should consider impact protection, and possibly are you in an area where you're subject to malicious damage, because you can put additional control measures in place to mitigate that risk. So it's really thinking about that design stage and trying to look ahead into a crystal ball to alleviate a lot of these problems. And it can be done. We work on a lot of projects where we get involved at design stage, and we're putting in some really good long-term practice measures to make sure things are as they should be. And then just moving on to a different topic in terms of sprinklers. So a lot of some of the car parks I see, both enclosed and unenclosed car parks, you may have sprinkler protection. There's been an update to the LPC rules, which is the rule book that insurers use to design, install and maintain sprinkler systems. And the design densities, we call it, the 12.5 millimeters per minute over that area of 260 square meters, has been increased to reflect the additional challenges of electric vehicles. But the research is still very much ongoing in terms of what is appropriate protection, but we have something now meaningful within the LPC rules. But when we're looking at sprinkler protection, we also have to understand both the benefits and the limitations of sprinkler protection. Sprinkler protection within your car park, you can't, just as the fire brigade can't, you can't have water penetration into the battery of an electric vehicle. It's just impossible for it to occur. That you've got a rigid thermoplastic battery module within a vehicle, so you can't get water onto it in the traditional way that sprinklers work. And so it's really understanding what am I likely to achieve from my sprinkler protection. Yes, you will gain gas phase cooling. You'll be able to lower that ceiling temperature in your car park. Yes, you may prevent lateral fire spread to adjacent vehicles either side of the EV. But really, what you're doing in terms of objective is really looking to achieve a control. You're not going to achieve suppression or extinguishment of that fire using sprinklers. Just as the fire brigade wouldn't achieve that with their hose reels. So it's important that we look at sprinkler protection objectively. And again, it's not that silver bullet that's going to solve the problem in terms of EV fire. It forms part of that, very much forms part of that layers of protection philosophy that I'm endorsing here. And I think it's also incumbent upon us to think beyond just fire as well, and think about other non-fire related events such as flood as well. So you can see from the picture on the right, and as part of our site assessments, we will undertake flood assessments, climate change assessments, cyber risk assessments. But flood assessments are important. We can look at the topography of the land. We can look at the position of it. We can look at the data that will indicate whether the area is subject to a flooding risk, and that's a really important piece of pre-work that needs doing before installation. And also in other risks, slips, trips and falls, really important to be considering that, the length of the cables. I was somewhere fairly recently walking down the street, and someone would just put an extension lead across their path and are charging their electric vehicle from their house to their off-street parking. Really good classic example of a potential slip, trip and fall incident. And then electrocution, we mitigate that through use of competent contractors, but also making sure that we don't have a water ingress problem. And also, just to support you and help you, we have some really good guidance documents out there. There's a really fantastic guide that I'd urge you to have a look at from the Risk Authority. You can Google this, and it's called the RC59 document. There's some really good guidance within that document around thinking of the key areas to think about within fire safety. And also within Zurich as well, we have online our own risk insight as well, which is a really good guide and provides some really valuable good practice tips and hints when you're thinking about designing, installing and maintaining electric vehicle charging points. And then just thinking a little bit further about the installation of electric vehicle charging points is just to think about what I would call the pre-flight checks by the pilot. Those really important areas to think about, before you move forward on a scheme, and is to think about the competency of the person installing the charging equipment. And I think that's something that competencies are really something that's really an important word in the fire safety world at the moment, and is something that's is to look at the competency of the person doing the work. Is it the right type of charger? And again, doing your due diligence on the type of charger and ensuring the correct RCD rating of the device as well. So some of the checks you can do with your supplier or contractor just to satisfy yourself that you are you're meeting all the expected requirements. And then just again, some really practical tips and hints here really as well. Again, it's worth looking and monitoring damage to cables. That's something we would look into. How often are you checking around trip hazards and any potential damage to cabling, especially some car parks will again a lot of use. Are the charging points correctly positioned? So not only thinking about impact damage, but also malicious damage, but also thinking about are they away from escape routes, windows, etc. So it's linking that back to your fire risk assessment. So you think about the impact of the installation of your chargers. And then mitigation of overheating as well, thinking about are they being installed in accordance with the manufacturer's instruction, and are they in areas where they're not going to overheat. And one of the areas we regularly look at and monitor really is that first point really is just looking at quite a simple thing to do is the housekeeping, looking at where that charger physically is positioned. And is it a clear area? Is it free from leaves and combustible materials? You know, sometimes some of the sites I've dealt with, we've ended up putting barriers around it, or we've put yellow painted floor markings. So sometimes there's some really simple things you can do just to mitigate that risk of combustible materials cluttering the charger. Regular inspections, absolutely. So I would look into how often are you inspecting the chargers? How often are you looking at them physically, boots on the ground, looking at the charger units? And also, lastly, do you need to consider any additional security measures? Do you need to have CCTV? Some sites I deal with do have that overlooking the chargers. Do I need to think about external lighting and other areas? And that's all going to be on a risk-based approach. There's no one size fits all. And then just moving away just for a moment away from fire, one of the other key areas that can sometimes be overlooked is really thinking about liability and the impact for you from a liability perspective. And that can really be sort of summarized in three key areas really. Is thinking when you're designing your charging facility and your charging areas, have you got inclusivity for all people, including the disabled? So that's a question that needs satisfying. Secondly, have you got appropriate signage and information for all people? And finally, is the environment right in terms of signage, spacing, and height as well? So that that element of liability should feature into your sort of initial plan review, design review prior to installation. And then just staying on the subject of liability as well. Again, the liability impact is clearly linked to that regular housekeeping and inspection of your charging cables as well. Really important to mitigate electrocution from damaged cables, the slips, trips and falls. Again, we're bringing in here that human element of really checking the area on a regular basis as well, and then making sure you have a means to log and report any damage, and so it just doesn't get left on somebody's in tray. Yeah, there is a problem and that isn't dealt with. So that's really important. You can circle back and make sure the problem's rectified. And also as well, clear instructions at the charging area, we think is a really important addition as well. And I think for me, my experience of working in this space is that we can foresee a lot of these problems by through design. I think the one area where we're really good at is actually sitting down before at the sort of concept stage of your move to EV cars or change to EV vehicles or charging, is to sit down and discuss all of these issues and work closely with you, because we do see a lot of challenges. We do see a lot of things presented to us, which is a fait accompli, which can be alleviated through good design, good planning, and dealing with these problems at concept stage. And one of those key areas is really around that spatial separation. So we would typically advise, where you've got combustible walls, you should be thinking about trying to achieve a 10-meter separation distance. Or if you've got unprotected openings in non-combustible walls, that distance can be reduced down to 7.5 meters. So thinking about your spatial separation, linking back to the construction of the building, is a really important aspect. And you should capture the justification for your spatial separation from your building or within your car park, within your emergency plan and fire risk assessment. So there should be a justification as to why you've decided this is where I'm permitting electric vehicles. And then just the last couple of slides now, just to finish off. Um, um, one of the key areas is to really not just focus on the electric vehicle fire, but actually to think about the charging unit as well. We do get issues and events with charging units. So part of that control measure is to make sure that they are being inspected, tested, and maintained by a competent contractor. And that's something that we spend time looking at in terms of the suitability and competency of a contractor. Have you got suitable signage to alert emergency services, and also have you got the ability to kill the power should you need to? Staff training, again, we want to know who's involved with the EV chargers and the setup on site, and have they got adequate instruction and training? And thinking about what should your inspection regime be for your charger? Should it be daily? Should it be weekly? And then, do you need to consider physical isolation at the end of the day? There's something else to fit into your wider fire risk assessment. And then finally, very last slide, I just want to finish off and just say, I think I want to finish off on a positive note. I think all of these challenges associated with electric vehicles that we see in the modern day environment can be overcome. They can be dealt with. And I think the way to do that is through this layer of protection methodology. I think we can go through this in a step-by-step methodical way to manage and control the risks associated with electric vehicles and charging points. So Jen, that's me just about wrapped up now. So just to say thank you for listening. Thank you for inviting me, Jen, and I'll hand back to you for any questions.
Thanks, Gary. I said I had the easiest job, and you did an excellent job there. I was scribbling away, and I do not know how we're going to answer all these questions. In fact, we're not going to be able to. We've been absolutely inundated by questions, and what I've been trying to do in the background is group them together so we can touch upon as many of the topics as possible. And just a reminder, we will be sending the link out. So if people want to go back and reread the transcript or go back to any of the key points that Gary's already covered, you'll be getting that link after this session. So Gary, to kick us off, do EVs need to be included within fire risk assessments?
Yes, the short answer to that is absolutely. So think about the fire risk assessment being a document that thinks about all aspects of fire risk, not just within the premises, but those that can affect the premises itself. So I think in my experience, the competent fire risk assessors are doing just that. They're thinking about all aspects of fire risk and not just what goes on in the building.
Thanks, Gary. We had a couple of questions come in when you were talking about protection, specifically sprinkler protection. So first part of the question, is it suitable for EVs? And then we had another question around the differences between water mist and sprinklers.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So let's. I think just to pick off the one first about sprinklers. I think what I would say, the sprinklers do give some benefit in terms of an EV fire, but I think in terms of what they're actually able to achieve is what we call control, mitigation of that fire spread to adjacent vehicles and cooling of the fire plume above the vehicle. But they do have limitations. We have to be honest and say they're not there to extinguish a fire or suppress the fire. They're not able to do that purely by the nature of the sprinkler system design and the fact it's shielded. So I think it's really important that we provide a balanced view of sprinklers, their benefits, but also their detracting features, what they can and can't achieve. And then just moving on to water mist. Yeah, water mist deals with fire suppression or fire extinguishing in a totally different way to sprinkler protection. Sprinkler protection essentially is designed to wet the material below, whereas water mist requires the fire to drive the fire to create those droplets and turn it to steam. In terms of water mist, what we're looking for there is we're looking for evidence that the water mist have been tested for an electric vehicle environment. So if I get an electric water mist proposal on my desk, I'm going through and looking at the data to assess its suitability for an electric vehicle fire, but also again understanding what benefits does it bring me, but also what are the detracting features for the challenges of an electric vehicle.
And Gary, we had loads of questions on the charging points and the risks around the charging point, and whether is it the charging point itself that poses a risk, or is it when the car's connected and charging that the risk is at its highest?
But I would say when the car is connected to the charging point, because it's actually drawing current. But I think for me, it's actually the charging point is live, even if it's not plugged into the car. So it's actually thinking about this holistically, thinking about actually the charging unit and the car. You can't disconnect, excuse the pun, them. You've got to think about the risks associated with both as part of your overall assessment.
And we like a pun, Gary. We've established that from the title, so you are forgiven.
No, that's okay. I'm forgiven, am I? Thank goodness for that.
And just off the back of that question, somebody's also added in around building regulations and charges being a set distance away from certain buildings, but they've said actually a wall-mounted charge is okay because they're a slightly cheaper option.
So in terms of wall-mounted chargers, the first thing to ask the question of is what are you fitting that to in terms of what sits behind that wall. I've seen chargers fitted to walls where there's combustible construction, so you might have a metal face or where the charger is connected to, but behind that would be highly combustible construction like a polyurethane foam or a polyisocyanates foam. So the key thing is you do not want to be fitting your chargers to any form of combustible material. So, you know, what some of my clients do, they do a drilling core, they understand, they drill the wall to understand what that material is in the wall. So just be really careful on that, because what you don't want is a charger overheating event where you could have fire spread into your building, into the combustible construction.
And a couple of questions in terms of maintenance as well as installation. So installation contractors for EV charging points required to ensure there are installing charging points in line with guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing the answer to that question is yes then, Gary. The expectation is that installation contractors are expected to work to the guidelines.
Yes, Jen. Sorry, yeah, I'm slightly misunderstood the question then. Yeah, so exactly that IET document I showed earlier on in terms of that good practice guide. What I would do is seek to understand which code of practice are they working to, just as you would if you're installing a fire alarm or a sprinkler system or a fire door. You'd want to know to what standard are they working to, and just be comfortable that standard is robust enough as a robust enough standard for that work.
And while we're on the IET code of practice, does that include information about charging points for bikes and electric scooters as well, or is this just purely for EV chargers?
Just for EV chargers. There's lots of really good guidance out there. London Fire Brigade have got some really excellent resources around scooters, mobility scooters, bikes, etc. for just those additional emerging risk challenges. And we're doing a lot of work in that space also as well.
Thanks, Gary. One of the things that I know when we talked through the content I'd not appreciated was some of the environmental factors, especially if you've got a fire and then that contaminates the wider environment. So we've had a couple of questions on that around the ramifications if contaminated water gets into sewage systems. Who's liable? Who should be preventing it?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and the answer is I don't know the answer, because it's very much with a lot of the technology we're seeing in the emerging risk world, battery energy storage, electric vehicles, scooters, it's bringing with it these additional challenges such as firefighting, water runoff, and really, in many ways, a lot of the legislation, a lot of the guidance, the environmental agency guidance is trying to catch up with emerging risks. So we're actually learning as we go, and there's a lot of work going on with the Environment Agency at the moment around this particular topic, around firefighting, water runoff, and what we do with it and the implications of it. But what I would say is that it is, some of the, for example, in battery energy storage, what we do there is we foresee that issue, and we look at things like attenuation tanks or means of capturing the water, or penstock valves to stop the water going into the local river course. So I think those same principles can apply to EVs, thinking, well, actually, where is that water going, and taking ownership for that.
Thanks, Gary. We've got 30 seconds before we're up for time, so I will fire one more question at you. And we've had a couple of questions around the let it burn approach. So is that the best approach? And what would happen if there were other cars and houses next to the fire?
Yeah, okay, great question. In my opinion, the let it burn approach is the right approach. It's the lesser of the two evils in terms of the impact on the environment. So it's a lesser impact on the environment because you're letting it burn. You're not pouring thousands of litres of water onto an EV vehicle and essentially turning all of those heavy metals into the ground and the toxic Chemicals. What do we do in that situation? we look for boundary cooling. So we look to protect the areas around. So if we've got houses or other chargers or even other vehicles, that water is used to cool that area, really surround it to prevent that lateral fire spread, prevent that radiant heat flux impacting other areas. So that's what the fire brigade really will be focusing their efforts on, preventing damage to other areas, but letting the vehicle in the middle burn.
That's brilliant. Gary, we are at time. There are so many other questions. You are a wealth of knowledge, so people are wanting to hear more from you. But as we've said, we will be sending out the link. So if you want to rewatch it and hear back of any of the points that Gary's talked about today, our contact details are on the screen as well. And as Gary's referenced, please go look at our website and all the guidance on EV charging. Thanks a lot, Gary.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone. Bye bye.
everyone.